Buenos días, ¿cómo le va? Bienvenidos a mi iglesia.
No, we're doing the English one.
We're doing the English one? Okay. All right, well, hey, good morning. This is Pastor Jason Abbott. It's good to have you joining with us on video for another Bible teaching. And just want to welcome you. It's a little bit different experience for us, a little bit different thing a lot of churches are kind of getting into. So we are appreciative of you joining us. It's an interesting time, dealing with a lot of these things, a lot of the changes right now. But I'm hopeful. I think a lot of these times where I think back maybe to like 9/11, where you had a kind of sense of unity within the country coming together, maybe more so than we'd ever seen in quite a while, especially this generation. There's usually a lot of art and literature and great things like that come out of these times of stress for national unity and that kind of thing. So I'm excited about that. And one other thing that seems to happen is that we kind of recognize who the real heroes in our society are. For the 9/11 time, it was pretty much the firefighters. We kind of took our gaze off of all the glitz and glamour of so many of the other heroes that we kind of lift up, and we saw that the firefighters are really outstanding people who risked their lives for us, and that was highlighted with the events of 9/11 in such a big way. This time, it seems to be the healthcare workers. They're kind of getting a renewed sense of respect from the community, admiration for them, appreciation for them, and so that's a good thing. And so I'm excited about that. I hope that kind of thing can continue. And so just wanted to add that in as we get started. Today, we're going to be picking up on a series that we started a number of weeks back before all this kind of isolation stuff, and the accommodations we had to make before that ever started. And we started with the idea of living in a crazy, mixed up, unpredictable world. And as you can see, things just pretty much have gotten more crazier, more mixed up, and more unpredictable. So it kind of leads into a lot of good discussion for us. We began starting, first of all, talking about, well, when we live in a crazy, mixed up, unpredictable world, we're going to be kind of given an avalanche of issues to deal with. Sometimes it's on a personal level because of the way those crazy and mixed up, unpredictable things kind of interact with us. And sometimes it's on a bigger level that we kind of see changes in our community, our society, our culture. And we talked about the importance of prayer for that, exercising our faith, strengthening it through prayer. Then we started talking about trying to understand a crazy, mixed up, unpredictable world, and came about it from the approach of, well, the crazy, mixed up, unpredictable world is that way because the people in that world are far from God. And so we want to understand their perspective. And in doing that, we realize that, well, they're not going to see things the way we do, and they're definitely not seeing their society and their ways the way that God does. And they're not going to do what God says do. They're not going to step out in faith. They're not going to do what's necessary. They're not going to obey His guidance. They're not going to do what God says do until they see as God sees. And so that's a process we have to understand. And when we were looking at in the Bible, we were looking at an Old Testament story of the book of Naaman. I'm not the book of Naaman. A soldier by the name of Naaman in the book of 2 Kings. So anyways, last week we were focusing in on what is our responsibility as Christians to a crazy, mixed up, unpredictable world. And we looked at another story from 2 Kings about a time where a city named Samaria was under besiege, and they were pretty much about to break. They were at a point of starvation, desperation, and the story was about 4 lepers who actually go over to the Syrian camp that is besieging the city, and they find out that, well, no one's there. God has caused them to be so fearful of being attacked and ambushed that they leave. And so while the city is starving, the 4 lepers who stumble upon this magnitude of a camp and all these supplies and resources. You know, they're enjoying themselves, they're celebrating, they're having a great time, but the city is starving. And the takeaway from that was, well, you know, we have to share what we have found. That's kind of our responsibility. We have to share what we have found. And what we have found was that there's a God who loves us, who cares for us, who sent his Son to die on a cross for us so that we could be redeemed, that the world could be made new. And so that's our responsibility. And so whether it be in our communities, whether it be at work, whether it be in our families, or however the setting, we have a responsibility to share what we have found. Like a beggar sharing bread. And so that's kind of where we left off last week. Well, this week, I wanted to continue on that subject line. And I want you to think about something as we get going. Maybe with this isolation and the stress of it, and a little bit of anxiety about, okay, how's this going to turn out? What's going to be next week? What's going to be next month? And all the challenges that it may present to you for you or your family as well. Maybe you're pretty strong with that. Maybe, you know, so far that it's been uncomfortable and it's been unpleasant, but, you know, you're weathering the storm. You're doing okay with it. You know, you're managing things. You're okay. And you've been relying on God. Your faith is strong. You don't feel like there's any kind of cracks in the armor. You know, you're actually doing okay. You know, and so that's your experience right now. But what about when that changes? What about when your experience with God changes? And so that's what we're going to look about today. Our changing experience with God. Our changing experience with God. And so if you have a Bible, or you have a Bible app or something like that available, go ahead and follow with us over into the Old Testament. And when you get there, go to the book of Job. The Old Testament book of Job. If you don't have one of these free Bible apps, I like to recommend them quite frequently because they are so helpful and they are so good for things like daily devotions. There's one called the YouVersion app, which is very good. It's free. There's also another one I highly recommend from the Gideon's organization. It's also free. And so you can make use of those. Put them on your tablet, put them on your phone. You'll have God's Word available with you. Take where you need to go. So anyways, we're in the Old Testament, and we're in the book of Job. And a few things, maybe you've already been a bit familiar with the book of Job. But the book of Job is a very ancient book. The name Job itself appears in some of the oldest literature we have from Egyptian excavations. Probably at least 2000 BC. It appears in the Amarna letters, which are around 1400 BC. There's an old tradition, it comes out of the Babylonian Talmud, that the book of Job is actually from the hands of Moses. And so it was transferred from Moses to us. And so that would put it around 1500 BC, just in round numbers. So, as you can tell, this is a very ancient book. And Job lives just outside what we would normally think of the Holy Land. And he's a very rich and he's a very wealthy man. And he has pretty much everything he could possibly want. He's a righteous man. He is obedient to God and all that God has called him to do. So he's very faithful. And so he has vast wealth and a great family, and many resources and a thriving faith with God. And so he has everything that anybody probably could want at that point in time. And then something changes. And what we get to walk through in the book of Job is these 42 chapters of this one calamity after another, starting off with Job being stripped away and taken away, all these things that had kind of supported him in his life, all those things that had been such great blessings to him, one calamity after another, and to the point to where he's impoverished, and much of his family is deceased. His social status has changed. His health has changed. His health is now deteriorating, and he is going through quite a struggle. And so if you haven't read Job, or not familiar with it that well, don't just take this kind of nutshell kind of summary. Get into it. Look into it. Like I said, these 42 chapters of this ancient book are very intriguing and very eye-opening, and probably do you good, especially at this time where we're dealing with a lot of suffering that we're recognizing and health issues that have come up. So Job has gone through all these calamities, all these different catastrophes in his life, and he's to the point now where it's just everything has been taken away and taken away and taken away. And but he's remaining very strong in his faith, and he's very adamant that he knows that this is going to turn around at some point. This is going to show that I am who I've always said I am. I'm someone who's faithful to God. I don't deserve this kind of calamity that I'm enduring, but I'm dealing with it as a man of faith. And then Job's experience with God changes. And then it gets very, very difficult. If you're in the book of Job and you're following along, we'll be in verse 23, starting with chapter 23, verse 8 and 9. So, Job chapter 23, verses 8 and 9. And this is where Job really starts to break down, because, like I said, he's lost so much already, and then now his relationship with God is starting to change. And he says in verse 8, he says, "Behold, I go forward, but the Lord is not there. And I go backward, but I cannot perceive him. And when he acts on the left, I cannot behold him. He turns on the right, and I cannot see him." See, Job has been okay to this point. He's weathered the storm. He's been very strong in his faith. And now something which probably he never could have predicted has happened. He no longer has that sense of God's presence in his life. He no longer has that sense and that comfort of God's presence in his life. And this may be quite unnerving for him, quite shocking that, he's been able to lean on that through the hard times. But now it's not there. And as Christians, when we go through a hard time, we can remain strong in our faith. We can do the things that kind of buttress our faith and exercise our faith and keep us close to God. But then something happens, and our experience with God has changed. And that can be quite shocking. Maybe because, one, we kind of never expected it. We just didn't expect it. We kind of thought that, and this has been our past experience, so this is all that we've known, that when we've done these things, when we've been participating in worship, and we felt God's closeness to us, when we read His Word, we feel like we're really hearing His voice. when we're in prayer, we're kind of assured and we know that He's listening to us and He cares for us. He loves us. He's there. Maybe when we're serving at church, and the fact that we're giving of our time, for something much bigger than ourselves, and something like the church and the ministry, and so we're fulfilled with that, and we recognize God's presence and strengthening us for that. And so all these kind of things may be going on, and we're kind of feeding off of them. But then it changes. And maybe it's because of, like I said, something we hadn't experienced before. Maybe we have wrong expectations. We can see here in the text that Job is relaying his experience about how now he's turning to the left, he's turning to the right, he's looking here, he's looking there, and he has no sense of God with him. Well, Job felt that way, obviously, in this very ancient document. David in the Psalms writes of this in some ways, and even mentions, God hiding from him and how that felt. The prophet Isaiah writes about these kinds of experiences and says, "Oh Lord, you are the one who hides yourself from Israel." Sometimes God hides himself from us. That's just how it is. Sometimes God hides himself from us. And what I mean by that is that all those kind of nurturing, strengthening feelings, that confidence we've had under thinking about His presence and kind of knowing it's there and just being assured of it and strengthened, well, there comes a time where your faith has to be tested. Just like it did with Job. Just like it did with David. Your faith has to be tested. That may be unnerving by itself, just thinking that, wow, my faith has to be tested. I have to be kind of put in a position between a rock and a hard place and just kind of, made to, deal with life in such a, strong way. Yes, your faith has to be tested. Because faith, like a muscle in our body, atrophies when it's not properly tested. It weakens. And so God from time to time will test us in our faith so that we can grow stronger, so that we can mature, so that we can go to another level in our faith. And part of that testing is when He hides Himself. When He withdraws that closeness, that strength, that presence that we had been used to, and we had found, in one place and another, and just kind of, enjoyed that. But He's moved back. And we may be like Job. We might say, behold, I go forward and the Lord is not there. And I go backward, but I cannot perceive Him. And when He acts on the left, I cannot behold Him. And He turns on the right and I cannot see Him. That's a desperate prayer. C.S. Lewis once made the comment about this type of thing. And he said that, when the teacher is given the test, he's always quiet. And that's kind of what's happening. When the teacher gives the test, he's always quiet. Or to maybe use another analogy from childhood, sometimes you have to take off the training wheels. Sometimes you have to take off the training wheels, and that's what's going on. And it can be unnerving, and we can feel like this kind of spiritual darkness. I had one pastor friend of mine who went through this kind of thing for quite a while, not weeks, not months, but quite a while. And he called it spiritual dryness, that dark night of the soul, kind of feeling spiritually alone. When that happens, and if you're walking with God, period of time, at some point, it may. But when that happens, don't panic. Don't think God's left you, that, you're all of a sudden completely alone in the universe, or maybe, you're just kind of beating yourself up and just kind of hyper analyzing every little thing. Well, did I sin here, and did I do something I shouldn't have done, or did I do something over here, whatever it is. Don't panic. Just lean in. This is a normal part of the stretching and the growing of your faith. Just lean into God and all those practices that you always enjoyed and always found nourishment and strength from. Lean into those. Lean into that fellowship. Lean into the God's Word. Lean into your prayer time. Lean into finding a place in ministry where you can serve and help others. Lean in. It's going to be okay. It's just a way of God strengthening your faith and building you up for a period of time so that you can move to another level in your faith journey. Now, and if you forget everything else, if you just start on the video right here, then this is the best part. You can be 100% confident and assured that God has not turned away from you, that God loves you. Throughout that spiritual dryness, despite feeling alone, despite feeling like Job, you're looking in every direction for God, but you just don't feel His presence in your life. Look, you can settle down firm on this truth that God has not turned away from you. And you can know that with 100% certainty, because on the cross, when Jesus turned to this Heavenly Father, He wasn't there for him. He wasn't there for him. And you and I will never have to experience that and have that. You and I will never have to worry about that, because on the cross, He felt the isolation. He felt the judgment. He felt the condemnation. He was made sin for us. Never have to worry about that. Your experience with God may change. It may seem different than it did last week and last month. It's just a part of growing